Hello everyone. This is Janie Hill, and I'm doing a presentation on Baby Bebop, especially exploring the concept of homosexuality in young adults. So a little bit about the author, Francesca Leah Block. Block is an American writer of young adult literature, mainly speculative fiction. She is best and most famous for her Weetzie Bat series, which explores complex issues of homosexuality and lesbian self-identity in teenagers. Baby Bebop is part of the series and is the prequel for the first Weetzie Bat novel. She is the winner of the ALA Margaret A. Edwards Award for her significant contribution to young adult literature. Baby Bebop was originally published in 1995 and was the winner of the ALA Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Book Award in the same year. Block takes traditional folklore archetypes and translates them for contemporary teens with her inventive use of lyrical language, transforming a gritty urban environment into a funky fairy tale. A lot of her books, the locations are often based on Los Angeles. As you can see, she's wearing a Los Angeles shirt. Block is from the city of Los Angeles, and she's very proud of it, and she often will incorporate um, the city in her novels. And Baby Bebop is one of those stories. Her novel, Through Baby Bebop, Block raises awareness regarding the social constraints of forming one's sexual identity, specifically in young adults. So, a little brief summary of the novel. Derek McDonald, who's the protagonist in the story, is a 14-year-old boy who struggles with feelings of being attracted to other boys. Derek believes that liking boys means that there is something seriously wrong with him, and he often feels ashamed, afraid, alone, and guilty. He falls in love with his best friend, Pup Lambert, and grows jealous of Pup's relationship with his girlfriend. Derek confesses his love to Pup, but is rejected by him. Upon realizing that Derek loves him, Pup no longer wants to be his friend. This rejection by the only friend he trusted creates some deep psychological wounds. 2 years later, a 16-year-old Derek gets into a fight with some neo-Nazis after they call him a faggot and proceed to beat him. While in the hospital, Derek experiences suicidal thoughts. He also has dreams of his parents and a stranger who teach him that it does not matter who he loves. So, like I mentioned before, Block addresses the impact that social constraints have on sexual identity, namely guilt and shame. In a good quote from Norbury, she suggests that guilt is depicted as a consequence of internalized homophobia with which protagonists must at least partly identify. Protagonists, like Derek, experience a form of separation guilt from an early age because they fail to conform to the norms of the family or community. Finally, events external to the teen protagonist, and for which they cannot be held responsible, then trigger serious depressive episodes which jeopardize the protagonist's positive identity development. Homophobia and heterosexism are concepts centrally implicated in these guilty feelings, and both are found at the society and individual level. These prolonged guilty feelings about the self can seriously jeopardize a young adult's individual identity development. Block points out in her novel that same-sex desire is not a choice to be controlled by the individual character, and therefore the implication is that the character cannot change their sexual orientation, even if they wanted to. And she makes this explicit in her novel. Um, Pop Lambert repeatedly tries to, set up a series of dates with Derek with another girl, thinking that if he dates a girl, he'll stop being gay. And she points out that you are who you are, and it's not up to people to change your sexual identity. Guilt or guilty feelings can be described as as a form of distress or similar to anxiety, and this creates um, sex shame of of young adults and their development. So, some noticeable quotes that I pulled from the novel is Derek, when he's afraid to tell his grandma Fifi that he is gay. He thinks to himself, Derek wanted to tell her how he wanted to tell her. What if he hurt the person who had loved him his whole life? And then after Pup Lambert rejects Derek and walks away from him, Derek looks in the pool of water and sees his reflection and says he saw a scared boy who was in love with Pup Lambert and who hated himself for it. So he's experiencing a series of guilt-related depression, and the character's positive identity development in these examples is generally jeopardized. Derek's sexual identity creates a form of self-alienation from his family, friends, and community, and it's worse when he gets rejected by his friend who he trusts. And he starts to become more distant from everyone, even strangers. He feels that, and much of what Blog points out in her novel is that, you know, young adults who are afraid to tell someone that they trust, it's probably because they're afraid that they might get laughed at, or they might be treated with hostility, or in Derek's case, rejection. So probably the most violent scene of the novel is when Derek gets beat up by the neo-Nazis. So this passage I picked out its for its level of intolerance that Block is highlighting in her story. So, where are you going, faggot? The first boy asked. Derek felt they had looked inside of him to his most terrible secret. He lost all his strength he had been trying to build for as long as he could remember. He wondered if he deserved this because he wanted to touch and kiss a boy. So, guilt generally focuses our attention on the victim, creating compassion for the suffering of others, particularly where there is a responsibility or culpability in relation to that suffering. In certain instances, like this example, the critical voice is internalized in a way that it becomes pathological. In this example, guilt may lead to a form of self-punishment or a readiness to submit to the punishment of others. So he feels that he deserves to get beat up by these neo-Nazis because he is attracted to other boys. And they beat him up so bad that they actually put him in a coma. And it's a very disturbing scene, but it's a scene that Block puts in because she wants to raise awareness and she wants people to know that people who have a same-sex desire are often treated with hostility, especially with um, groups of people who are opposed to it in an extremist way. So at the end of the novel, when he's in the hospital, he starts hallucinating, and he in his dreams, he's talking to his parents, and they tell him that they accept him for who he is, and that he should have the courage to tell people his story, and to love himself for who he is. And his grandmother Fifi, she tells him, telling your story is touching, it sets you free. So Derek's resolution is to build a healthy self-identity and to tell his story, but to listen to others when they need it. And Carol, she states that we may all benefit from sharing our stories with a young person who has yet to understand that moving through struggle and pain only makes us stronger. Block's text argues for increased social tolerance of diversity and difference. The focus on the guilt would function to focus our attention to Derek and his internal and external suffering. Newberry states that transformation in social attitudes would generate increased acceptance and understanding, and a valorization of the positive social contribution to be made by gay and lesbian teens. More positive and progressive social attitudes would help, in turn, to elevate and resolve the young adult's individual and damaging experience of guilt, leaving them free to pursue a more authentic life. So, in terms of censorship for this novel, there's not a lot of information. It was censored in 1998 by a high school in Calgary, and the director was pressured into removing the book from a group of parents who claimed that the book contained unnecessary, inappropriate, and offensive descriptions of homosexual content. But the board appointed a review committee and they deemed the book appropriate and voted in favor of keeping the book on a shelf. There was a more recent incident in 2009 that occurred in West Bend, the city of West Bend in Wisconsin. This one was a little bit more intense. A group of Christian civil liberties, they call themselves, they filed a claim against the library and the city and stated that the book injured its members by placing Baby Bebop in the collection. And they asked for monetary damage. They asked for the mayor to be to resign, and they also demanded that Baby Bebop be publicly burned as a deterrent to repeating this offensive content. So they wanted to burn this book in the courtyard of the public library. And this created a lot of debate and heated tension with parents who also created a group called the Parents for Free Speech and claimed that books with LGBT content should be allowed to remain in the library. And according to the ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom, they compile a list of frequently challenged books with diverse content based on reports from libraries, schools, and media, and Baby Bebop ranked 12th as most frequently challenged book. So in an interview with Block by the National Coalition Against Censorship, they asked her what her opinion was in the censorship of her novel. And she stated that, "I'm a bit surprised in a way because the message of all of them is love, tolerance, and self-expression. On the other hand, I'm not surprised because the message of all of them is love, tolerance, and self-expression. And then many of these books are important literature with important messages. It is important for young readers to research these things and understand why certain books are controversial." So Block is expressing her opinion regarding censorship of young adult literature that contains LGBT content. As an author who has written more than one book that has been at the center of controversy or censorship controversy, like Baby Bebop and Weetsy Bat, Block makes a firm stance that she ignores the criticism and backlash surrounding some of her books that have LGBT content because she feels that she writes not for the sake of controversies, but to write in a way that supports human rights, and for her this is the strongest form of resistance. So I found a few articles that look at the LGBT content in public libraries, and they raised a good question. Are Canadian public libraries providing adequate LGBT collection in their libraries? And what I found was that Rothenberger and McKechnie, they compiled a list of 40 popular books, young adult fiction that had LGBT themes. and they searched 40 different Canadian public libraries. They were split, so 20 were major cities like Toronto, um, Ottawa, and then there was 20 that were considered medium-sized populations like Ajax, which is east of Toronto. And what I found surprising is that the percentage of the books that they found that had LGBT content for some of the major cities was actually pretty low. It was around 40%. And as cities who have, large cities like Toronto, um, Vancouver, and Montreal that have, an amalgamation or like a such a diverse population from different cultures and perspectives, I would think that public libraries in these centers would have a collection that is reflected on the diversity of the people. So in their list, they said that Halifax, Edmonton, and London Public Library had the highest percentage of these books. And then the lowest that they found was Cape Breton Regional, Montreal, and Winnipeg had the lowest percentage books in their collection. But we also have to consider too that this is a list of books. So just because, Winnipeg and Montreal don't have these books, that doesn't mean they don't have other LGBT books in their library. So that's one issue with this article that I do have. And maybe if they had created a larger list of books, it would change the percentages. I'm not sure, but it was a good article though, and I do appreciate the effort that they made. So here's another article, and it picked up off the article that I just talked about in the last slide, 5 years later. And they did a similar study. They looked at 9 libraries. All of them were major cities, but they only looked at 35 fiction titles. The titles that they picked were kind of popular titles that had been recently published, so they didn't look at any old titles. And the average of the titles they found in these libraries remained about the same, so at about around 40%. So it was almost the same percentage from the Rothbauer and McKenchie's findings. And similar to Rothbauer and McKenchie's, Edmonton remained at the top of the libraries to carry the most LGBT books, and Winnipeg remained at the bottom, carrying the fewest of the LGBT books. I understand that this article too, this was in 2004, and obviously, it's 2017, so time has changed. But considering that libraries do change, it would be interesting to see a more recent study to be able to determine if the percentages have increased or decreased. Maybe Winnipeg's not at the bottom of the list anymore. Maybe they're at the top. It would be a potentially really great area of study for someone to do a research project on. Just putting that out there. But it's a good question, and I'd like to ask everyone, do you think Canadian public libraries are providing adequate LGBT collections? And finally, repercussions. Self-esteem questions. Am I normal? Why are my stories deemed wrong or required to be censored? Harsh rhetoric used by some parents to describe LGBT books like the Christian Civil Union. The censorship of LGBT material highlights a sense of intolerance for the books. And, do I feel safe? That's a really good question. A teenager or a young adult, if you want to call them, if they want to access these books, they should feel safe in a library. And what kind of message does publicly burning books in front of a library send to people who want to read LGBT novels? And finally, can you think of any other repercussions or consequences of banning or censoring LGBT books? So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking to everyone on the forum. Bye.